When We Are Together explores the entwined connections between culture and place, considering participatory making as a collective practice of cultural maintenance, where our cultures perpetuate through care. This research is situated behind the scenes, exposing the engine room of cultural production, with placemaking as a support mechanism. To make culture is often to support a continuation or morphing of it through a changing context. Making, according to Tim Ingold, is the capacity to find the grain of the world's becoming and bend it to its evolving purpose. If the maker is a master of improvisation, of making do with whatever is at hand, then the mender is who brings together what is needed to remake whatever is at hand. He prompts, if we see making as an ongoing process in which multiple people participate during the biography of an object or thing, then it is never a definitively completed act. It is the way that things are mended that defines their status as emergent, as changing objects or processes. Repairing, mending, and making are often performed through processes of intuition or guided by unspoken ways of knowledge. Tacit knowledge can be defined as something you know but can't articulate. I questioned how processes of participatory making could harness these kinds of knowledges within their systems as tools to learn from our places in order to imagine their possible futures. Clay Spinuzzi explains participatory design to take a Heideggerian approach to knowledge, in which the fundamental difference between involved practical understanding and detached theoretical reflection is stressed. This pragmatic approach involves alternating between the two by discovering tacit knowledge, then critically reflecting on it. Beginning with autoethnographic research methods, I looked to my own identity as situated in both Italian and Australian cultures. I began thinking of the edge conditions in between the two as spatial, a place that requires negotiation, the frictions and contrasts forming new understandings and paths. I anchored my identity exploration to my family's traditional making processes, when we make salami, wine, and sauce. The making techniques passed down generationally through lineage, storytelling, and regular practice. A day when a group of people come together and spend time making something that they could buy at the shops, in a shed that is completely unglamorous with its grit, mess, and broken furniture, and the cultural maintenance and care that this supports and sustains. I started this semester questioning hosting relations as an act of designing, experimenting with ideas of collective making and generating dialogue. I facilitated situations with people from a range of creative and non-creative disciplines, including a conversation circle, a dinner in my new empty house, and assemblage experiments. I have situated my research in my backyard shed of our new house in Carlton. A culture is being imbued into place, and I am exploring how cultures are transferred within you and what infrastructures support this process. Our house is a temporary occupation of 12 months before it will be demolished. I think it's interesting in itself to live with a provisional place that has kind of got an end. We're caring for it, learning about the established garden. It's ours for a temporary stage of its lifespan, but soon it will be changed. Patrick Bouchain defines an infinite place as one that can be appropriated. It demonstrates the idea that what is not made to be lived in is more livable in than what is designed expressly. We decided to turn our shed into our making studio, and invited another friend to set up a workstation too. My first experiment was a design charrette. Consulting this intuitive approach to site requires lived experience of it in order to design within rather than impose onto a place. I invited the direct users of the site to first write down what their needs, wants, and dreams for it were. We began a mapping exercise, marking up the shed and its surrounds in chalk. To dream up a place together that might stem from pragmatic needs like a spot for a toilet or tools, but also becomes a combination of the people who are in it. Meanwhile, engaging with our neighbours through the back laneway, realising that opening our back garage door does an infinite number of things. We can rehearse a small but fully functioning system in performing this possible experience through initiating an engagement with place. Looking at a floor plan and performing a traditional site analysis, it may have been absurd to see a shed and think of an opera theatre. But through this act of participatory making, thinking through space, employing intuition, tacit knowledge, negotiation, previous or lived experience, we can consider what can be afforded from the nuances of a place that before was just labelled a shed. The next step was to each select an object. Before I had instructed them to, the participants had begun assembling their objects into what you can see here. This brings in the overlay of considering shared resources within a site, people thinking with an ad hoc mentality and taking agency over the process, considering how the resources and materials that are available can be utilised or reconsidered. Making these systems as accessible and translatable as possible gives agency and authorship. We began to formalise this process through drawing, bringing together everything onto a diagram that I could take and work with. Theatrum Mundi's Making Cultural Infrastructures notes, if stagecraft can be a lens through which to see how public life plays out in cities, how does the design of the stage itself shape the crafts that inhabit it? If cultural display is what happens on stage, what is the urban equivalent of the backstage, where production, experimentation, and rehearsal takes place? I began to question if the potentialities embedded in the fabric of a place can be accessed using tools and processes of cultural production. I wanted to test out an idea for the shed that we generated, the theatre, and was drawn to the back laneway. Being an old service laneway, I considered patterns of hiding service and inverted the back of house, inviting interaction and exposing these systems of creative and cultural production. Our theatre was created with a sheet, a roller door, and some paint buckets. We put chairs out in the laneway, and it became a radical negotiation with our environment. Neighbours stopping to have a look, listening out for cars to move the chairs out of the way and put them back. We invited neighbours from down the street and saw both accidental and invited audiences. By opening the roller door, these encounters spill out onto the street. I also explored potentialities of place by roasting pumpkins from our garden in the old oven. We learned by doing and called in for advice. For me, a point where culture is reinforced becomes around food and making processes. So the engine room of cultural production is not just about the production of space or culture, but the coming together of production and maintenance. Following these experiments, I drew the studio we designed together. The drawing was not meant to be a construction drawing to look at and build, instead nonsensical in that it had the space to be interpreted or misinterpreted again. I took it to the group to plug in a feedback loop, giving them a projector rather than selecting parts that I thought were important. The projection became a negotiation in itself. The participants had to be attentive to their own bodies and shadows within this encounter as they drew, finding space within the unexpected or undefined moments. In letting our imaginations run wild, this layer of the process became a kind of storytelling. The decorators prompt that the practice of rehearsal is not disconnected from a commitment to the future of a place. Fiction, whether in literature or in spatial design, has a critical function. After you've seen what a place could be, you can never return to normal, even if the intervention happens for an instant in time, because people engage with it and that was meaningful. To further test ideas of documentation as generative and interpretative, I held another conversation circle, contemplating the many ways a place or situation can speak. We read a text as a conversational prompt. This was about the annotations it generated. I hope to see what existing, learnt, or tacit knowledges led multiple people to highlight or disregard from the same material. I collected the annotations, conversation notes, and spatial condition documentations and sent them to a friend. He wrote a story based on the material, which could be passed on again. Now this one initial encounter becomes amorphous, and the documentation exists outside of the temporary moment, encouraging further iterations and reflections. This ties back to ideas of culture that is rooted in place but changes over time through repetition and reinforcement, and has this lingering form of continuity. My major project proposal is a school imagining possible futures of place through systems of cultural production and creative practice. I am proposing a potential site to be a temporary occupation at the mezzanine of the current Peter Monty's supermarket in Fitzroy North. The site has been approved for redevelopment into a mixed-use complex, including the supermarket and apartments of 5 and 7 stories. Peter Monty's is a story of an Italian migrant family who settled in the northern suburbs of Melbourne and built their business together from nothing. It is now at the heart of the suburb, loved by locals for its character. The site has changed incrementally over time, but elements of the infrastructure remain. I hope for the school proposed to harness tacit knowledges and interpretation as tools to develop a system that will learn from itself, generating engagement for a future potential. I think the site offers an opportunity to consider an established culture of place and the way that could be maintained, contributing both to the site and its wider context. In hosting a school during the planning stages of development, the aim is that both cultural maintenance and production could contribute to decisions for its future, building a community and enabling the users of the site to be involved in the imagining of it through participatory making processes. Finally, I hosted a lunch to reveal the engine room of this research project, which you have seen throughout this presentation. We ate around my work, a conversation powered by the infrastructure of spaghetti and homemade wine. Making visible the working systems of my research provides the opportunity to have a conversation with others about it, and through revealing these systems, they can be edited and reconnected. I encouraged writing on the work, moving it, asking questions. For my family, making and eating together is our cultural conversation point. We maintain a culture by caring for it through repetition and reinforcing elements over time. What could all the things that happen alongside the outcome when we make together, like talking, learning, teaching, and caring, mean for the construction of our neighbourhoods and cities? Considering the scales of encounter at the dinner table, the rhythms and aliveness of a conversation expanding and contracting, you can hear my voice, then listen for it among the others. The encounter itself as supporting infrastructure. I begin to contemplate my interior design practice as a choreographer of these encounters by facilitating situations within places that are endlessly co-produced, dreamt, imagined, tinkered with, and edited by the people who live in them.